Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Kyla Lara-Breitinger. I am a preventive cardiologist here at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And it is my absolute honor to welcome my guest, Dr. Professor Gardner, who is a professor at Stanford and a nutrition scientist, here to a very special podcast on nutritional controversies in social media. Professor Gardner, or Christopher, is a professor of medicine at Stanford and nutrition scientist. He has studied what to consume and to avoid for optimal health and how to best motivate individuals to achieve healthy dietary behaviors. He currently serves on the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee and is a past chair of the AHA's Nutrition Committee. He has conducted and published dozens of human nutrition intervention trials, including trials of the Mediterranean, ketogenic, vegan, low-fat, and low-carb diets and their effects on cardiometabolic health. Some of his current interests include stealth nutrition that I'm really looking forward to hearing about, unapologetic deliciousness, and institutional food settings. He is currently working on personalized nutrition explorations with several of his colleagues with a particular focus on the gut microbiome that we are all interested in hearing about. Professor Gardner's work was recently featured in a Netflix docuseries in January of this year that I personally can vouch for and I really loved, called You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment that was just published recently also in a large, very high impact journal. Welcome, Christopher.
I'm really happy to be here, Kyla. This should be fun.
Great. And so just tell us a little bit about this stealth nutrition. I read about it on the website, but I think all our viewers want to know what stealth nutrition is.
So first, let me begin and say it's not deceitful in any way. It's just that about 15 years ago, I was getting very frustrated. For all the listeners, I was a philosophy major who wanted to open a vegetarian restaurant 35, 40 years ago. And by mistake, I got a Ph.D. and by mistake, I got a faculty position. And by mistake, I got their taxpayer dollars and started running studies. And I thought, wow, I've exceeded all my expectations. I'm here at a medical conference and I've done science and I've seen cause and effect. And I think you should eat this. And even my own study participants would say, well, I don't cook that much. I don't really know how to do that. That's not convenient. That's not my culture. I don't think I have enough money. So thanks for this study. Never mind. It's like, wait, this is like better than having a vegetarian restaurant, but it's not. I'm not having an impact. And a pediatrician and I started a class on campus called Food and Society. And selfishly, it was to help us get pilot data for a grant that we never got funded. But the NIH was interested in some innovative ways to approach young adults to help them from ever gaining weight instead of helping people who were overweight to lose the weight. And we proposed social responsibility and engagement. And we made a class called Food and Society. And we, on a handshake, agreed, don't ever talk about biochemical pathways or health, only talk about climate change and animal rights and welfare and human labor abuses in slaughterhouses. And it was career changing for me because almost every student in the class changed their diet, talked about it, wrote to their parents, shared the books with their roommates. And we had really engaged with these sort of external societal costs, and not the same message didn't resonate with everyone. So somebody really liked the climate change. Somebody else was more on the animal rights. Somebody was more on the human rights, like slowing down the speed in the slaughterhouses, the line speed, so that the humans aren't suffering from so many knife wounds. And so that was really career changing for me, realizing I do know the biochemical pathways. I do know how to run a nutrition study. But unless I start partnering with some other people about business, law, policy, culinary, taste, like one of my latest group of collaborators is chefs. Like, yes, it has to taste good too.
Absolutely.
But for me, the stealth nutrition is, hey, I could explain why the fiber and the low saturated fat will lower your LDL cholesterol, but wouldn't you rather have me talk about a global fusion of flavors that will just blow your taste buds away, save the planet, save the animals, be kinder to the immigrants who are working really hard in the fields and the slaughterhouses. So I like having those extra hooks, and it all ties together. So when we saw the students making changes for these different societal values, external values, they were the same ones I was trying to get across with nutrition anyway. They're eating less fast food, cooking on their own, going to the farmer's market, asking where their food came from. And so I was sort of achieving the same end that I had in mind originally,
Yeah.
nutrition in my back pocket, not getting them in the face with feel guilty, eat less, deprive yourself, punitive.
Right. I think that is so wonderful to hear and so holistic. It actually reminds me of Dr. Valentine Fusters, who like kind of coined the term of primordial prevention, where even before primary prevention, it's teaching kids and young kids early on in the classroom about the context of health and why you should eat healthy. And you have the more holistic approach that includes climate change, which is a very real thing, and just being able to relate to where the food comes from. And I think that is so wonderful. You know, you mentioned saturated fat and LDL cholesterol, and I think a lot of our viewers are seeing a lot of discussion and controversy being talked about on social media when it comes to beef tallow. I mean, I'm getting emails from people. My passion is nutrition. I did a master's in nutrition. You know, I get really intimidated when I think about doing a nutrition intervention. So it's amazing to have you on here just to ask you more about those things. But in particular, beef tallow is becoming talked about more and more. Can you tell us more about what beef tallow is and how McDonald's in the past used it? And maybe that's the cause because we switched to seed oils and that's the reason for the obesity epidemic. And it's just kind of targeting seed oils as a cause for obesity all of a sudden. And beef tallow is somehow the answer.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think with the current news about RFK Jr. being maybe moved to Health and Human Services, and seed oils is one of the things he's been attacking. Part of that is because, oh, it's extracted and it's extracted with chemicals and that must be horrible. You certainly have to extract the beef fat from beef, but it's being sort of claimed as something natural. So let me just point out a couple things that seem quite odd and maybe they would be helpful. So the seed oil thing, there's a bunch of them that go by the name of the Hateful Eight. Have you heard that yet, Kyla?
No, please.
Oh, yeah. There's a Hateful Eight where it's not.
And take notes.
Yeah. So they're calling them seed oils, but if you go one step further, it's the Hateful Eight. And it's a bizarre sort of combination of eight. So 3 of them are soybean oil, corn oil, and rice bran oil. None of those are seeds. So soybean is a bean. Corn, culinarily or technically, botanically, could be a vegetable or a fruit or a grain, but it's not a seed. And rice isn't a seed. But the seeds are sunflower, safflower, corn, grapeseed, and cottonseed. And that makes up the Hateful Eight. So what's really bizarre here is sesame seed and flaxseed are not in that list.
Nope.
So when they say seed oil and you actually dig down a little, it's not all seed oils. It's a little weird. So there's some that aren't seeds. There's some seed oils that aren't in there. And I think that's because what they're really trying to get at is omega-6 and omega-3. So when you if you listen to some of the podcasts, you say, oh, these are highly inflammatory. Well, for the inflammation side, that really is something that's appropriate for fatty acids, and it really comes up with omega-3s. And omega-3s have been in the cardiovascular literature for decades and decades, right?
Correct.
Well, most of our fats provide energy. It's just strictly carbon-to-carbon bonds that provide energy. So there's something really interesting about longer chain fatty acids that have double bonds. And the omega-3s are particularly unique in that they can be used for hormone-like purposes. And omega-3s relative to omega-6s, this is what we found out decades ago, are a little more inflammatory, a little more vasodilating. They'll lower your triglycerides a little better. And I think blood pressure is the 4th one compared to omega-6s. And somewhere along the way, somebody flipped this and said, oh, that means the omega-6s are pro-inflammatory, pro-coagulatory, pro-vasoconstrictory, pro-raising, and it's not. The omega-6s are not. The idea that the omega-6s were a little better, but that didn't mean the omega-6s are bad. So I think what's
Correct.
happening is they've got this set of seed oils that aren't all seed oils. And it's really hard to describe omega-6 and omega-3 to the public. And so I think they've been sticking with seed oils when in fact they're mixing it up with omega-6s and omega-3s. And then that part is really silly for this reason. So if you look at all the oils that people put on salads or that they cook with, very few of them have any omega-3. So
Hmm.
flax oil is the only one in all the oils out there that has more omega-3 than omega-6. So let me ask, do you have flax oil at home in your kitchen?
No.
I've never seen flax oil in a
Where do
restaurant.
they even sell it?
Yeah, I think they do, but it's pretty rare. Okay,
Right.
so if you were to get other sources of omega-3, there's three. Soy has a little, canola has a little, and walnuts have a little. Soy and canola are part of the hateful eight. Okay, so even though those three things have a little bit of omega-3, they have more omega-6
Right.
than omega-3. So you really can't get a lot of omega-3 with any of the oils that you buy in the store unless you get fish oil. So being a preventive cardiologist, I'm sure you know how much people have been interested in fish oil. So those are the true things that are even longer fatty acids. They act even more like hormone-like substances. But do you cook with fish oil? I don't. I don't have a bottle of fish oil.
No, not at all.
So, so I think they're getting the seed oil mixed up with omega-6 and omega-3, and it's an inflammatory thing, and it kind of makes sense, but they're getting the seed oil part wrong, and they're getting the omega-6, omega-3 part wrong. And there's a 2017 American Heart Association presidential statement that says, okay, get over it. The omega-6s and the 3s, all the unsaturated fats are better than butter, beef tallow, and lard. Those are all saturated fats. You can go back to the 1950s to see the elegant studies that were done to show that unsaturates relative to saturates are good for your blood cholesterol, specifically your LDL cholesterol. So that part's wrong. So is there some other kernel of truth here that I can find? And Kyla, one of the things that I hear when I listen to the podcasts is something cited often where they say, oh, you know, Americans have doubled their intake of seed oils in the last few decades.
Hmm.
That's happened with this rise of all kinds of chronic diseases. And we know that there's heart disease, cancer, diabetes, stroke. And so that must be a link that there's this doubling in the food supply and these chronic diseases. Okay, but really, it's not because people were making more salads with sunflower and safflower oil dressing. And it's not because they were sauteing more vegetables. It's because they were eating more ultra processed food. And so the
Yes.
ultra processed foods have these. They do have sunflower and safflower and partially hydrogenated cottonseed. They have a lot of the seed oils in them, but they also have sugar and salt and refined grain together.
Stabilizers,
It's
addictive
a
things to make everything palatable. The
it's a
list goes
little
on.
it's
Can
a
you
little bit.
explain to the people listening how you would define ultra processed? Because a lot of our healthy foods are processed, like canned vegetables and
Yeah,
frozen foods. And so people get confused like, I can only eat raw foods, but there's a difference between ultra processed based on the NOVA classification system and gently processed foods that, we require in our diet.
yeah. There's four NOVA classifications, and one is whole foods, and one is the herbs and spices, and one is sort of using the herbs and spices to work with foods. There's a third category, and the fourth category, interesting, this is Carlos Montero from Brazil, and he created this scale that's completely agnostic to nutrition. So it doesn't take into account any macro or micronutrients. It really is just the presence of two things. He calls them cosmetic additives, and he calls them ingredients of limited or no culinary use, which seems like a weird phrase. But in more practical terms, what it means is you and I don't have it in our kitchen, and no restaurant has it in their kitchen. Like, who
Right.
has high fructose corn syrup? No one. We might have maple sugar, honey, molasses, and table sugar, but no one has high fructose corn syrup at home. That's used industrially. So the categories that make it ultra processed are colorants, flavorants, emulsifiers, bulking agents, gelling agents, thickeners, anti-foaming, glazing, carbonating, sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, and isolated proteins. And American Heart
Yikes.
Association is coming out with a paper where we're listing all of these and we're showing this is the definition of ultra processed foods. And 60 to 70% of the American food supply that you'll get in a supermarket has one or more of these things. And a downside I see to Nova is whether you have 15 or just one of these, you are UPF. So all you have to do is cross over, and you could have a high sugar junk food thing that actually isn't qualified as UPF for Nova. And as soon as you switch out high fructose corn syrup for the sugar, now it is UPF.
Mm-hmm.
So it is something that's sort of intuitive. Yes, Americans, we all see there's a lot of junk food out there.
Yeah.
See how ultra processed it is because it has a lot of these different ingredients. And I'm going to go back to seed oils for just a second. For my stealth nutrition, here's what I would love. I would love for people to keep making salad dressings with sunflower and safflower oil, even though they're part of the Hateful Eight. I would love to see them cooking and sauteing vegetables with some of these oils that were processed intentionally so they would have a high smoke point. But as soon as they see it in an ultra-processed food in the supermarket on the list, they avoid it because they're terrified of seed oils. Because you know what they would do then? They would be cutting back on sugar, refined and sodium. I don't think it would be the seed oil, but because they go so often hand in hand with these other things, I think an unintended consequence was they would be eating better by fearing the seed oils in these foods that are filled with lots of other things. And so what we really need to do to move forward is recognize there are some things that technically would be ultra processed, but actually have some pretty decent nutrition profiles. Whereas we actually have some unprocessed foods like red meats that are completely unprocessed, that from a cardiovascular point of view, we've always suggested we reduce and limit. So it's not just being ultra processed. You should take into account the nutritional components of it. And if you were to try to if RFK Jr. is going to try to get rid of all of them, we don't have enough food to replace that right now.
Right. And what do you say to those Americans who say it's my God-given American right, if I want a bag of chips, then I'm going to get a bag of chips? It seems that it's going to be very difficult to ameliorate all of these things. And then there are also groups of people who come at me when we're at dinner parties who say, who are more carnivore diet, paleo diet, right? These whole kind of foods that the hunter-gatherers use, and they didn't have all this disease, even though they had communicable diseases. But they say that, they rank, the dietary guidelines rank, a sugary cereal healthier than a piece of filet mignon. Like how is that even possible when a sugary cereal has no real food contents in it?
Yeah. And so those algorithms are always hard to make without finding exceptions. So they're ranking tens of thousands of food. And if you look, you'll find an exception that just seems bizarre and doesn't fit. So nobody's really come up with the perfect algorithm. I will tell you that David Katz years ago, while he was the head of the preventive research clinic at Yale, came up with something called NuVal. And NuVal was values of diet quality. And in the East Coast or in New England, it was put in a bunch of grocery stores, and it scaled all foods from 0 to 100. And he had an amazing team of scientists come up with this. And it did avoid the cereals being ranked high and the meats being ranked so low. I thought it was really beautifully done, and it was having an impact. And they stopped using it because sales were down. It was having an impact, and people were avoiding the foods. And there were so many foods that ranked low that they were losing sales. They weren't gaining sales by people saying, oh, thank God my grocery store is looking out for me. I have this intuitive value. I can just go to my trusted grocery store and look at this. That only works so long until profits are down. And then somebody steps in and says, whoa, we can't use this algorithm anymore. It seems to be working. People aren't choosing some of the foods that we need to sell. So it's complicated. Food is
It
tied to a lot of money and big business.
Yeah, and I mean the government subsidizes so many calories per American, and a lot of it is based on like the corn industry and other really impactful big names. And so, for the listener who has limited resources and limited access to a personal chef that can make highly palatable non ultra processed foods, who has multiple children, and they're going for calorically dense foods to
Mhm.
satiate their family, and they don't have time to meal prep with all these perishable foods. How do you think about those people in terms of a cardioprotective diet, or a diet that promotes longevity and increased health span?
Yep. And so what we really need to do is make some of the staples just much easier to get at. So beans and grains are really what cultures around the world evolved on. They're inexpensive. You can dry the beans, you can dry the grains. They store really well. If you think of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, African, Asian, Latin American, there are so many Indian, South Indian, there are so many amazing dishes that made great use of beans and grains, which are usually in bulk, dry, very inexpensive, pretty easy to soak and cook. And then they added lots of flavors for them. So you've got an Indonesian gado-gado that's an amazing peanut sauce, or you've got
Mm.
hummus, which is chickpeas, right? And some oil. And you've got beans and rice and salsa in Latin America. And so if you look around at the cultures who celebrated these with inexpensive, easy to make foods, then you can top all those. I think Mark Bittman did a really nice piece in the New York Times a while ago that was just basically stir fry, soups, and salads, and use
Mm.
so many variations. So if you want to make this culturally appropriate, you start with just some of the basic ingredients and have them on hand. They're quick to whip out, and then you see, oh, what else do I have in the fridge today? Or I've got a spice shelf for just a few pennies. I can add spices, and I'll make my salad a little different today than yesterday. It'll be a grain-based salad today. It'll be a lettuce-based salad tomorrow. I'll make some soups. Oh, and this will, you can totally mix up the soups and the stir fries. So it's not the same thing every day, but
Yeah.
this has been my fun working with chefs and seeing
Yeah.
how with just a little twist, they can make something simply elegant that's fairly quick and tasty. And that's where we could be helping people, is making those more affordable, more accessible, more convenient.
And less intimidating, right? Because they assume that it takes hours, it takes expensive materials. And so, I think that's fantastic. For the listeners out there who feel that they don't get enough protein to hit their macros, right? Because the current guidelines are about at least 1 gram per kilogram of your total mass, right? But there are even higher protein goals for older people to reduce frailty and all these things. But people don't know you could get quite a bit of protein from a cup of lentils, a cup of beans,
Yes.
edamame.
Thank
I
you.
mean, you have to
Yeah.
eat twice the volume, but you're getting the same amount of macros, like at least 28 to 30 grams per serving, and you get all of the benefits of the fiber and the lowering of the cholesterol and the anti-inflammatory effects, since the anti-inflammatory lifestyle is a big trend now too, right?
Mhm.
Anti-inflammatory
Yes.
diets.
And so, yeah, the protein, sorry, I can do an hour on protein easily. All plants have all 20 amino acids. They're not missing any. I wrote a whole paper on this. Vegetarians and vegans do fine unless they're just eating cookies and chips and crackers all day long. It's really not that hard to get enough protein, and we have no place to store it. So any excess protein you eat gets turned to carbs and fats. You can't save any till the next day. So just a fascinating factoid here is most Americans get more than the RDA for protein, and half of Americans get the fiber recommended daily allowance. And yet they're so obsessed with protein, like, just in case I'm not getting enough protein, I'm going to have another piece of meat. But I'm not paying attention to the fact that I'm not even coming close to the fiber content. So if they just did have some beans, peas, and lentils,
And what's so important about fiber for people who are no grains, low grains? What's so great about fiber? Can you
yeah,
talk maybe about the microbiome and the importance of fiber for people who never really thought it should be a high priority compared to protein and low carb, let's say.
Yeah. And an interesting part of the definition of fiber is we don't absorb it. So we don't have human enzymes. So if we've eaten a bean, we're going to take the carbs and the fats and the proteins and the vitamins and minerals, and the rest is going to keep going down our digestive tract because we can't break it into small enough pieces to absorb. Turns out we only have a few enzymes to break down some of those things, but the bugs, the microbes in the colon have like 1,000 enzymes between them, and they can break down all the fibers. And this is something that they use to thrive on for fuel for themselves. When they break them down, they create byproducts that we actually absorb in the colon that are anti-inflammatory and healthy for us. There's also a mucus lining in the gut, especially the colon, that protects us from nasty, noxious things that we've eaten getting into our body. And that mucus lining, this slimy lining on the inside, is kind of made of carbohydrate-like substances. And in the absence of eating fiber, the microbes in the microbiome eat the mucus lining, and it thins and thins and thins. We think that's part of the issue with leaky gut syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been doing a lot of microbiome studies with fibers and fermented foods. I get to work with Justin and Erica Sonnenberg, these microbiome world experts. They do mouse studies. Now they've been doing human studies with us. And it's just fascinating to see how we've depleted the microbes in the Western-style diet gut compared to hunter-gatherers, compared to a few of these populations that are out there hunting and gathering for their own food, and they get to be in their 80s and 90s and have no heart disease, no diabetes, no blood pressure. That doesn't mean it's just because of the microbiome, but it is a fascinating difference. And in the absence of fiber, those microbes eat our mucus lining. And so feed your friends, those microbes. There's healthy and unhealthy microbes.
Right.
You'll eat more fiber. Not only will you keep yourself regular, and so a lot of people have issues with regular bowel movements. So keep yourself regular with that fiber, but also feed the microbiome so we don't forever lose these microbes that could be hard to get back in the long run. That's what the Sonnenbergs talk about all the time, is recovering this microbiome diversity that we're losing. So combinations of fermented food, that's kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, yogurt, kefir, and lots of actually the commercial market is exploding now with different fermented foods. If you've seen that, I don't know if that's true in your area. It's certainly
not so much in the Midwest. So I'm originally from California, where you are, and we share the same alma mater. I'm a Cal Bear, but I've landed in Middle America in Rochester, Minnesota, and so not that much fermented products besides going to a specialized, grocery store, et cetera.
Okay. Well, it's coming in different places. We've been doing studies where the participants have to track how many servings they're getting. And it's getting harder and harder to do our studies because they say, does this count? Does this count? Does this count? I found this. Like, we never heard of that. Who made that? So it's really fun. So I think in this whole thing, fiber feeds back into, can we get these inexpensive beans and flavor them? Lots of cultural diversity. I love, just for simplicity, how you can get the lentils or the beans now canned in low or no sodium. So they often came with a lot of sodium, and the food industry's been seeing this, and you can make them safe and long lasting without sodium or with lower sodium. So let's work together with the food industry. Let's reformulate some things so we get some of these cosmetic additives out of the food. I don't think we have to worry about getting the seed oils out of the food, but go ahead and cook at home with good quality oils. Please don't fear the seed oils. There's so much data suggests if you replace saturated fat with those seed oils, it'll have a cardiovascular benefit. It is complicated, but
it's so complicated. Would you tell somebody who doesn't necessarily eat beans ever, well, if I cook it in beef tallow, I'll increase my fiber content because I enjoy that? Will those offset each other? Because it's not, antagonizing one specific thing, but looking at your overall pattern. And if the net is eating less ultra processed foods, getting your lipid panel checked, maybe using beef tallow minimally, not in
Yeah.
everything, but and it motivates them to eat more grains and beans because they're cooking it in this. Would we recommend that as, preventive nutrition scientists, preventive cardiologists? Because these people are looking for, like, is it good or is it bad? It's a dichotomy. Is it yes or is it no? I have a friend who's from the South. He's like, have they ever done a randomized clinical trial on the fatty salmon you could buy at Costco versus a grass-fed, organic-fed lean cow, and looked
Right.
at lipid panels after 12 weeks because of the stearic acid in beef and this and that. And so tell me, and it's like, that's always the argument is, where's the randomized clinical trial? And it's like, well, how do you control all the other factors, which you were able to do to the best of what anybody could do by using twins, right? You rule
Yeah.
out the genetics, the environmental, and it's just the food at that point. And so how do we reach these people who are hard to reach? Because we want to meet in the middle in all aspects of life and not just food, and find some connection with people. Like, how do we get people, as we're ending our lively discussion on, like, how do we meet in the middle to help all of us become healthier and increase our health span for
Yeah.
the longest amount of time possible?
I love what you did there with that. And two of my favorite terms these days are with what and instead of what. And so if you just say beef tallow's horrible, then somebody's gonna shut you down and not listen to anything else. Say, have you tried some beans? Yeah, I don't like beans. Did you add a little beef tallow to your beans? And they ate more beans? Yeah. So you got them to eat because you added that with, and you can only do it if you do that. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to have the beans. I'm going to go have a Big Mac. And so instead of beans with tallow, you had a Big Mac? Wait, that's not what I wanted either. Okay, please go back. Have a little beef tallow because I want you to eat the beans. Let's meet in the middle. So
Right.
if you think what you would have instead, some of the things that you might be steering someone away from is actually better than what they would have had instead. And I think meeting them in the middle, meeting them where they are, listening to their culture, listening to food they have access to and that their budget will afford. Yes, you can cook with a little of these. I'll just, for my own sake, use coconut oil, which is a saturated fat, but I make a really good coconut curried veggie dish. Coconut milk with coconut fat in it raises your LDL cholesterol. I'm not drinking the thing out of the can. I'm cooking a little with it. You weren't suggesting drinking beef tallow. You were suggesting cooking some of your beans in beef tallow. So if you used a modest amount and it made it so it was more palatable to you, consistent with your culture and your budget, that would be a great way to go. And so I can tell you're a great preventive cardiologist because you're listening, you're thinking where to meet that patient. Love it.
I appreciate that. Well, when I first moved here, I did my internal medicine training in New York City, and I tried to put all my patients out here on plant-based diets, and I was almost, kicked out of here, where most of the patients, a lot of them are from rural Minnesota and around the surrounding states. And so it was a big learning curve for me that, it really depends on where you're born, the zip code you're born into, the family, the culture, and meeting people where they are, because we can give everybody what the biases we have, then that's not going to change their behaviors. And ultimately, we just want people to be healthy in general. So I really appreciate that and appreciate you being here. I could speak to you forever, and I think the listeners can continue to listen to you forever, but we're getting short on time. Is there anything else you'd want the listeners to know about yourself, or with the new administration coming in, some things to consider when we're reading things on the internet? Because it's hard, right? If you read something that connects with you, or you listen to somebody who connects with you, not everybody is going to look at their credentials. Not everybody is going to look at whether or not they studied that. And so there's a difference between being a scientist versus being an influencer and doing your own research. How do we mitigate that and tease out real information versus less real information. I think I really want to hear what you have to say as our ending when it comes to a lot of changes are going to happen. And hopefully, the ultra processed foods, the dyes, the colorings, all of those things come down, but help
Yeah.
the rest of us.
Yeah. So, I'm just finishing up working with the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, and we're going to come out with a report. And when I see what we've been working on, it's pretty similar to American Heart, to American Diabetes, to American Cancer, to the World Health Organization. Every once in a while, I hear these conspiracy theorists saying, oh my God, these, national health organizations are out to get you. That just is beyond me. I've served on many of those, and I'm stunned. Again, given how much controversy it seems to be in nutrition, I'm actually working on a book right now that hopefully will be out by the end of 2025. And it really is about finding consensus. And for most of the nutrition issues, there's a staggering amount of consensus. If you were to look at these national health organizations, which are they're always citing evidence. So you don't have to go find all the evidence yourself.
Right.
Just look how consistent those are. And if the person you're getting the influence from has no background in that, isn't citing science, is inconsistent across all these different groups, they're different disease and health conditions, and yet the dietary recommendations are still quite similar, you should think twice. Somebody's trying to make money out of being appalling and alarming and fear-mongering. And it's really, you should enjoy your food. Let's not forget joy and pleasure and company. And yeah, there's some things you can do in your diet to improve your health, and incorporate those with the joy and pleasure and the social aspects, and just be appropriately critical.
Well, we'll leave it at that as the last word. Thank you so much, Christopher, for your time, for your expertise, your experience, and we look forward to your upcoming book coming out and look forward to more of your nutrition intervention research. Thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
A lot of fun talking with you, Kyla. Thanks.